A mere 3 days changed the course of a nation forever. Think about that, just 72 hours. We're talking about the Battle of Gettysburg. A name that echoes, doesn't it? It resonates with a certain weight, a gravity. This wasn't just another clash of arms in a long and bloody conflict, this was something different, something pivotal. The summer of 1863. The American Civil War was already a brutal, grinding affair. It had been raging for over 2 years. The Confederacy under General Robert E. Lee felt a pressing need. A need to take the fight to the north, to relieve pressure on war-torn Virginia, to perhaps force a negotiated peace by striking a decisive blow on Union soil. Imagine the audacity, marching an army deep into enemy territory. It was a high-stakes gamble. On the other side, the Union's Army of the Potomac was weary but resilient. The stakes for the Union were immense. A major Confederate victory in the North could shatter morale. It could encourage foreign intervention on behalf of the South. So, when Lee's army crossed the Mason-Dixon line, the alarm bells didn't just ring, they screamed across the northern states. And then there was Gettysburg, a small, unassuming Pennsylvania town. Almost by accident, it became the stage for this epic confrontation. The initial encounters, the skirmishes, they escalated into an inferno that would consume thousands of lives and sear itself into the American consciousness for all time. At the heart of this immense clash stood two figures, General Robert E. Lee and General George Gordon Meade. Lee. The name itself carried an aura in 1863. He was the South's greatest hero, the master tactician, the man who had repeatedly outmaneuvered and defeated larger Union armies. His Army of Northern Virginia was his instrument, finely honed, fiercely loyal. Lee believed in offensive warfare. He believed in taking the fight to the enemy. His decision to invade Pennsylvania was bold, characteristic of his aggressive style. Then there was Meade, General George Meade. He was, in a word, new. Just days before the battle, he was thrust into command of the Army of the Potomac. Imagine the pressure, the fate of the Union suddenly resting squarely on your shoulders. Meade was not a flamboyant commander. He was known as a competent, if somewhat irascible, engineer. He was methodical, cautious. Perhaps exactly what the Union needed after a string of more reckless leaders. But could he stand up to the legendary Lee? That was the question on everyone's mind. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, around 71,000 strong, was a formidable force. They were veterans, hardened by years of war. They had tasted victory many times. They believed in Lee. They believed in their cause. As they moved north through Maryland and into Pennsylvania in June 1863, they were an army on a mission. They sought supplies, yes, but more than that, they sought a climactic battle. Meanwhile, the Union's Army of the Potomac, numbering approximately 93,000 men, was in pursuit. It was a giant, sprawling entity, a city on the march. They were also veterans, though their morale had been tested by repeated setbacks and changes in command. Under Meade, they moved with a renewed sense of urgency, shadowing Lee's movements, trying to anticipate his next step. The northern populace was in a state of near panic. Where would Lee strike? Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C.? The tension was palpable. Every report, every rumor sent ripples of fear and anxiety. The sheer scale of these armies is difficult to grasp from our modern perspective. And these two immense forces were now on a collision course. The battle began on the morning of July 1, 1863. It started with a clash between Confederate infantry advancing from the west and Buford's dismounted Union cavalry. Buford's troopers, armed with repeating carbines, put up a stubborn defense on McPherson's Ridge. They knew they were outnumbered. They knew infantry would eventually overwhelm them, but their job was to buy time. Time for the Union First Corps under General John Reynolds to arrive and secure the crucial high ground. Reynolds arrived, assessed the situation, and immediately committed his troops. Tragically, he was killed very early in the fighting, a significant blow to the Union, but his quick action ensured that the Union would contest the ground west and north of Gettysburg. The fighting on McPherson's Ridge and Oak Hill was fierce, desperate. Units were fed into the battle piecemeal as they arrived. The famous Iron Brigade, known for its distinctive black hats, suffered horrific casualties, standing its ground with incredible tenacity. As more Confederate divisions arrived, the pressure on the Union lines became unbearable. July 2nd dawned with both armies solidifying their positions. The Union line resembled a fishhook, anchored on Culp's Hill to the east, running south along Cemetery Ridge, and curling west towards Little Round Top and Big Round Top. Lee, believing his army was invincible after the successes of the first day, planned to attack both Union flanks. General James Longstreet, Lee's trusted old warhorse, was tasked with the main assault on the Union left, while Ewell's corps would attack Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill on the Union right. Longstreet, however, was hesitant. He preferred a strategic envelopment, a move around the Union flank, but Lee was determined to fight it out at Gettysburg. The fighting on the second day was some of the most savage of the entire war. Places with names like the Devil's Den, the Wheatfield, and the Peach Orchard became synonymous with slaughter. After the brutal fighting of the second day, Lee was still convinced he could break the Union line. He had attacked both flanks. Now he decided on a massive assault against the Union center on Cemetery Ridge. He believed Meade had weakened his center to reinforce the flanks. It was a gamble, a huge one. A frontal assault against a well-entrenched enemy, across nearly a mile of open ground. Longstreet vehemently opposed the plan. He argued it was madness, but Lee was resolute. His blood was up. He believed his Virginians could make the charge. The attack was preceded by a massive artillery bombardment, perhaps the largest of the war. For nearly 2 hours, Confederate cannons, around 150 of them, pounded the Union lines. Union artillery under General Henry Hunt initially replied vigorously, but then deliberately slowed its fire to conserve ammunition and to lure the Confederates into thinking the Union batteries had been silenced. The noise was deafening, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Men on both sides hugged the earth, enduring the terrifying barrage, knowing what was likely to come next. As the smoke cleared on the evening of July 3rd, the scale of the carnage at Gettysburg became horrifyingly apparent. The fields were littered with the dead and dying. The cries of the wounded filled the air. For 3 days, this small Pennsylvania town and the surrounding countryside had been transformed into a charnel house. The sheer human cost was staggering. Over 51,000 soldiers from both armies were casualties. This number includes those killed, wounded, captured, or missing. Think about that figure, 51,000, in just 3 days. It's almost impossible to truly comprehend. The numbers themselves are stark. The Union Army suffered around 23,000 casualties. The Confederate Army, a smaller force to begin with, lost even more in proportion, an estimated 28,000 men. For Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, these losses were catastrophic, particularly among its officer corps. Many of its finest fighting units were decimated, effectively crippled for the remainder of the war. The fields around Gettysburg became vast, impromptu graveyards and open-air hospitals. The smell of death hung heavy in the summer air. Beyond the raw statistics, there was the individual human tragedy, repeated tens of thousands of times over. Each casualty was a son, a husband, a brother, a father. The Union victory at Gettysburg was a crucial turning point. Lee's invasion of the North had been decisively halted. On July 4th, a day heavy with symbolism, Lee began his sorrowful retreat back towards Virginia, his army battered and depleted. The threat to the major northern cities was over. Simultaneously, far to the west on that same July 4th, the city of Vicksburg, Mississippi surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant. This double blow, Gettysburg and Vicksburg, was a disaster from which the Confederacy would never fully recover. The news of the victory at Gettysburg sent waves of relief and jubilation across the North. Morale, which had been sagging, soared. It seemed finally that the tide might be turning in the Union's favor. The Battle of Gettysburg left an indelible mark on the course of the American Civil War and on the nation's psyche. It is often cited, along with Vicksburg, as the primary turning point of the conflict. While the war would continue for nearly 2 more bloody years, the Confederacy's ability to wage offensive warfare on a grand scale was severely diminished after Gettysburg. Lee's army would fight on, often brilliantly, but it would largely be a defensive struggle from that point forward. The strategic initiative had decisively shifted to the Union. The battle also had a significant impact on military thinking. The devastating failure of Pickett's charge highlighted the increasing futility of frontal assaults against entrenched infantry armed with rifled muskets. While such charges would still occur, the lessons of Gettysburg and other bloody battles like Fredericksburg and Cold Harbor slowly began to sink in. The era of Napoleonic tactics of massed infantry assaults across open ground was drawing to a bloody close, giving way to the grim realities of trench warfare that would dominate future conflicts.